You did it.
Oh my goodness. I'm here.
Surprise. How are you?
I am doing well under the circumstances.
Yes. I'm just so giddy because you figured this whole thing out. I mean, you just got on Instagram, what, yesterday?
In 24 hours, yes.
I mean, that's just incredible. So, and look, you've been on for just a few seconds, and we've already raised $120 for
Awesome.
for the Equal Justice Initiative, which is so awesome.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for doing this. I know it's been a weird time, a weird year. How are things where you are? Are you doing okay where you are?
Yeah. Oh yes, it's we had some of the protests right up the street, which was interesting.
Yeah.
But due to social distancing, I chose not to go out. I feel like I'm in a risk category, and I have people in my life who are in a high risk category. So I just
yeah. We all kind of are protesting in the best ways we can right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So again, thank you for being here. I just feel so lucky to me myself get the opportunity to be the one who finally gets to talk to you, because all I hear is just incredible things nonstop, and so I just feel fortunate that we get to chat.
Yes, hopefully we'll do this in reality someday.
Yes, I would love that. So just start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, your history, how you got started. I don't even know if I know that story. All of those good things.
The try to do the long story short, but not make it too short or too long.
Mm-hmm.
That essentially I started working in the film business in 1981.
Okay.
My first experience on a soundstage was my first film experience, and that was at the MGM lot.
Mm-hmm.
And my job was to tear down the set from the final scene of Poltergeist.
Oh my gosh.
Of course, Poltergeist wasn't Poltergeist at that point. It was just this two-story house built on a soundstage on the MGM lot.
Right.
And it was it was very dirty. But
I can imagine.
Going back before that, I grew up in Los Angeles.
Uh-huh.
So I'm always the first to say this is my third riot, protest, revolution in my lifetime that I've been here to witness. Time flies.
Yeah.
And ironically enough, my parents, their whole professional lives were built out of the 65 riots, because my father was a journalist newscaster for radio, and when the rebellion broke out in Watts in 65, they didn't have a lot of black people to go as reporters to go into the space and report. So my father that was his first big on-air opportunity.
Wow.
And he ended up becoming the first black anchorman in Los Angeles.
Really?
And then he proceeded to start, out of the riots, to try to do something about it. He started a black entertainment newspaper called Soul newspaper.
Wow.
And he and my mother ran that for about 15 years.
I did not know that.
So based on growing up in that kind of rarefied space, which came out of the 65 riots, I had amazing opportunities.
Yeah.
And one of them was I applied to and was accepted for reasons I still don't understand to Dartmouth College, and with the intention of becoming a lawyer, and going to law school. And somewhere along the line, I realized I didn't want to be a lawyer. I just really loved film, and I'd taken all these film classes. So I ended up dropping out of Dartmouth after my third year there and coming back home to LA. And I got a job at MGM, and then I stumbled into the set, and that kind of was the beginning of my studio experience. But then the transformative things were more tied to reading scripts, because even when I was a laborer tearing down sets at MGM, I found the dumpster outside the story department, and I dumpster dived to get scripts. And the first script I ever read was a script called Brainstorm, which Natalie Wood was the movie she was doing when she died. And Bruce Joel Rubin had written that script, and it was just pulling it out of the dumpster, knowing nothing about it and reading it. It was a great script.
Right.
And I would pull these other things out of the pile and just kind of keep reading it to kind of get an idea of what was going on.
Yeah.
And eventually I got a job working for Alan Ladd Jr.,
Mm-hmm.
who had run 20th Century Fox and was most famous for having greenlit Star Wars. At a company called the Ladd Company.
Uh-huh.
And so I got a job there in 1981 after MGM as a office assistant. And it was the greatest experience because it was such a small company that you had access to everybody, right?
That's
You weren't,
interesting. Yeah.
so one day you're working in marketing department with those people, and then another day you're working in accounting, accounts receivable. Another day you're working in the story department,
Right.
you know, filing coverage, and primarily Xeroxing scripts.
Right. So you got to read more scripts.
Exactly. But I still carry as a claim to fame. I believe I was, if I wasn't the first, I was one of the first people to hold in my hands the script for Revenge of the Jedi, because Larry Kasdan had the office down the hall, and he was finishing up that work, and his assistant brought it up to the Xerox room, and she stood over me to make sure I didn't make more than the 2 copies that she needed to send up north.
Wow, that's incredible.
So that was, allowed me to understand how the story department worked and how scripts were processed in a company. And that began this kind of understanding of story analysis. So I moved from the Ladd Company to Warner Brothers as a story analyst, and read scripts for them for about a year and a half, and then moved up slowly through the ranks and became a development person for a producer. I got a job as a junior executive at Paramount Pictures, which was a very interesting time there. Eddie Murphy was probably the biggest star on the lot at that time, so I worked on a bunch of his projects.
Wow.
And starting with Coming to America. And then parlayed that in.
Pause for a sec, but it'll come right back.
So it's like you get calls in the middle of this. I'm sorry, I'm still young.
No. I think it's the Instagram bandwidth. It sometimes pauses, but then it comes right back. Sorry, I forgot to warn you about that.
No, I'm trying to. It's an education.
Yeah.
So I was at Paramount from 87 to 91, and I moved based on some success I had to Columbia when Mark Canton left Warner Brothers to take over Columbia, and I was at Columbia Pictures for another 7 or 8 years. Then I went off to produce, and I started teaching.
Yeah.
And teaching was the greatest thing that's happened so far in my.
Really?
I have to say, because for the most part, you're just operating on gut and instinct in the beginning. You're reacting more than you're acting.
Right.
And when I stumbled into teaching, it was the first time somebody said, well, explain what you've been doing. And when I sat in a room and tried to figure out, well, how do I explain how I rate a script? There's no rubric, there's no mental thing, checklist. There's just, your opinion. Yeah. And fortunately, when you start to tap into it, you go, oh, that's why I did all those things. And you have this kind of weird self-awareness birth through the channels of students who want to know it, right? And you just, the whole world starts opening up and you go, why didn't I do this at the beginning?
Right. Do you feel a little more freeing in that sense?
Absolutely. I feel more understanding, respectful, and stronger in the process than I've ever been.
Yeah.
But just because of the awareness that comes with yourself through the voices of other people.
Yeah.
That could have gotten there a lot quicker if I'd opened it up. But
someone I think we have a student watching right now. Someone said Kevin Jones is my teacher.
No.
It's very possible. So to kind of, I know we talked about this just briefly when we were emailing, and you were talking about this the other day, just specifically talking about, this specific movement, and it's just so encouraging and inspiring to hear from your perspective what good has come from it in your life and for your family. And you were saying the other day how we need to have more specific, be a little more specific, like what specific initiatives do we need so that we can see real and actual change. I think since then, actually, I know that they've come up with a few, which is great, and they've already passed the Brianna's Law, and they're trying to do a Can't Wait, and then the whole, defunding the police.
There's a lot that's missing because it hasn't been thought of yet.
Yeah.
And that's one of the challenges, even as I sit around and try to ponder this, and I have these daily conversations with my 25-year-old daughter to try to stay kind of connected to how she sees things, which is totally different than how I see things.
Right.
And the biggest challenge I find, and I find it goes back to teaching, is the hardest thing to figure out how to teach and protect is a healthy ignorance. That a lot of the things that happen that really are transformative happen because somebody didn't know it couldn't be done. Right. And if you know too much, it actually is limiting. So I'm always trying to looking at my experience and the wisdom that's associated with my experience, but not to try to say I know so much, because there's so much that hasn't been explored, and too much advice can backfire and limit people's imagination. But I do think that, as we kind of talked about before, and as you bring up, that being specific in terms of the milestones allow us to measure progress, and what the specificity would look like becomes the most interesting question. And you're right. This is the first time, and I'm optimistic about this and have a lot of hope, that we're seeing these things happen, actual legislation, and that is being adjusted based on what's going on. That's a first, right, for me. And okay, how do you keep that going?
Right.
Because I guess, and I just was having a heated conversation with my daughter this morning about it, because I go out on this jog every day, and I have all these thoughts when I'm jogging, and then I come back and I have to talk to her about it. And she's my she keeps the bat, says you can't say that, that's wrong. But it's funny. It's just every experience like this, you see this and you experience this huge outpouring of sympathy. But I've come up with this expression that sympathy doesn't have a long shelf life. That these programs are started, and the intentions and the donations and all these things are made, which are wonderful. It's a place to start. But soon thereafter, it kind of, the status quo takes over. Complacency, the people calm down, the urgency moves to the next thing. And before you know it, all those good intentions that were started just become buried in layers of other things. And then the next time you realize 27 years later, not only has nothing changed, it's gotten worse.
Right.
So you keep trying to figure out how to pay it forward in a way that doesn't let that happen.
I know.
And that becomes a bigger challenge. So my daughter, who's in a situation where she lives with her mother right now for a lot of reasons, and her mother's going through something, so she's really compromised. And so she's very shut in, and she's very torn, because she wants to go out and she wants to demonstrate and she wants to be part of this movement and this experience, which she's doing remotely. But she still is pulled to be out there. And my take has always been, it's not going away. It's really how we regroup in 6 months and say, where are we? And how we, in 12 months, where are we? And measure it and take these steps and be wrong. And adjust and be right and improve. And trying to find programs that allow that to happen. And the other thing is not letting the corporations off the hook this time. Because they will come in and they will do these grand gestures, and they will say, here's my new diversity program, yada, yada, yada. And then again, you look 10 years later and it's, we didn't really get anything out of it. It's like, what do you mean?
Right. It's like they're blinded by money,
They have an agenda, and it's whether they're intentional or not, the result is the same. So I guess I'm the most hopeful in this experience, is really looking at it and saying, we need to not just begin a conversation about, my daughter would say defund the police. I would say reimagine the police, reimagine their role, and reimagine what they are actually capable of doing, and how to divide up the responsibility. Some things are horrible at others.
Right. Absolutely.
And trying to say, if you watch a videotape on this or whatever the current technology is, and you will now be able to do these other things, it's just kind of unrealistic. And people need to be trained in special things that acknowledge and appreciate where we are and where we're trying to get to, and allow those to happen. But police reimagining is probably the fundamental thing that has to happen to begin the change.
Absolutely. And I know that the title of it, defunding the police, can be kind of triggering, but you know, in reality, it's rerouting that money to better mental health care for everyone, and better housing and better training, and
send the right team for the right job, right?
Yes, like come on, that is a huge responsibility, an enormous responsibility, that you have people's lives in your hands, and you have the moral compass,
right?
You know, and there needs to be a lot of accountability for that. So
absolutely, because it's the bad metaphor for me has always been, it's like the police is kind of like the hammer in our social toolbox. And no matter what the job is, you send out the hammer. And you go, but my hammer can actually screw a screw. And my hammer, no, it's a hammer. It does the hammer job. Can you send a screwdriver? Can you send pliers?
Something that actually fixes the problem.
Exactly.
Right. I love that. That's great. Just all great things. So talking about our industry from a writing perspective, like from your own perspective, what else can we be doing? I mean, I know someone had mentioned here, I'm going to scroll back just a little bit, more diverse storylines for Black people. You know, writers' rooms. And I was talking to a writer the other day who said he feels showrunners tend to hire writers who they feel will help tell their story better, and sometimes that goes along with hiring people who maybe look and feel like them, you know, in order to accurately portray their voice. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's a lot of truth to the reality of creation, that you tend to, whether you're aware of it or not, put yourself in your stories. How you see it is it's you. Actually, when I was teaching at AFI, I was always amused with the thesis films that were made there, because 80% of them, when they finally got around to casting and they cast the part, that person looked like the director.
Right.
Right. And it was so funny because it was finally hammered home when I was working with this woman, a very talented director, and she'd made this movie about a mentally unstable homeless person in downtown LA, who was Black. And that was a big part of it. But when you saw when we went down to the set and saw the
I saw that one.
Like she was dressed exactly like the director, only as in the homeless version. It's like, that's you.
Yeah. Right.
I don't think it's hard to escape that, because I don't think she was even aware that she had done that.
Yeah.
That's that bias thing that happens as we're trying to figure out.
Yeah.
But going back to the beginning of it, it's kind of like I get on a soapbox when it comes to story and narrative and its importance in our society. I mean, it really is the opportunity for us to test drive ideas through putting a narrative out there to see if it has traction.
Yes. Yeah.
And stories have really impacted our culture in so many different ways that we're not really aware of. So getting storytellers to accept the responsibility of what they do is a big part of it.
Yes.
And based on that, yes, we need a more diverse set of stories.
Yeah.
We need diverse voices. We need to really expand on how we pass down. It's like, Prometheus and fire is how we give it flippantly with no insult. Primarily, the alpha people get the responsibility of being our storytellers, because they're the most aggressive and they take charge and they just make it happen their way. And in our system, we tend to just let that happen.
Interesting.
Right? So
yeah.
I think, it's like introverts have a voice, a very interesting voice, but if they can't say anything in the room, they probably won't be able to push it through.
Right.
So how do you adjust? How do you find a way to make sure you're representing all types of human nature and all types of experiences that can be translated in a way that people will understand emotionally? But the real power of story is its ability to get into our emotional memory and our emotional intelligence and not just turn it into a book report and a logical, it was kind of intellect approach, because intellect doesn't last.
Yeah.
Emotion, you keep coming back to this kind of thing that makes you feel good or makes you feel fired up. That gets you going again, right?
Yeah. It's that human empathy that we're all seeking.
Absolutely.
You know.
So trying to figure out, the program that I'm involved in North Carolina, North Carolina School of the Arts, is a graduate program in storytelling. I like it. It's creative producing and screenwriting, but it's really trying to identify and be accepting of all kinds of different voices, if I call them marginalized, whatever. They're important, strong voices that need to be grown, and it's not going to happen overnight. But each class that we come in and we learn and we push, and we keep pushing, and they push us, right? And they basically, it becomes something. So they express this. A lot of times they're saying, especially my Black students, we love the legacy of Black storytelling, but for some reason in the system, it's mostly about civil rights stories or slave stories.
Right.
And we are so much more. It was not against that.
It's
That's
about
part
being
of it.
Black, not about.
The Black experience is a much broader experience, and you start to see different voices trying to say, I want to contribute to the space in what I'm aware of, not relegated to tell that story.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So
and I think we all just need to be aware of that in how we make every creative choice. Every department, needs to be aware of that. Because we all have to, if one it's a chain, and we all have to somehow, some way try to be on a similar path of thinking.
Well, it's interesting because I always wonder this, because I've read a lot of scripts in my life. It identifies the race of a character, and I'm like, why? Unless it's specific to the story that you're telling, which there's a lot of reasons why. And if the answer is because this is a story, which usually becomes clear in the drama, it's like, because if you don't, which brings up the next problem, which is if you don't label it, the default is white.
Right.
Right? So why do I have to say Black, even though I'm just writing a character from my own experience?
Yeah. Right. Right. I mean, and maybe that's a casting issue, because, I mean, for us, it's a conversation that we have with the writers, and so I think that we both just have to take that out of it.
Right. And, again, you go back to, if the person happens to be Black who's created a story with these characters and they become the showrunner, and you have a conversation with them, it's going to become hopefully cast in a way that reflects that person's vision and expanded by what actors and casting directors bring to the experience.
I just want to point out, someone said, yes, maybe it is a casting issue. And what I meant by that is there are many times when we want a diverse person in this character, and the writer says, no, it needs to be white or something for a reason. And so it's a conversation, it's a dialogue, and so we don't, there's a group of people who all have to have a wanted outcome, and we all just have to work together. So that's what I meant by, we have to have these dialogues with the writer, and we have to be on the same page. So it's
interesting,
it's an everyone thing,
there's a very interesting story that's in the documentary about casting, the Marion Doherty story, kind of this experience, and Richard Donner, the director, tells the story about casting Lethal Weapon, and how Donner always assumed that the Danny Glover character was white.
Right.
And it was the casting director who said, Danny Glover would be perfect for that part. And Donner admits, he said, it didn't make any sense to him. Didn't see it that way. And only because she kind of pushed him and fought him and said, look, and it made him think and said, the attributes that you want in that character can be brought
Yes.
out this way.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yeah.
it'll give you something that's not just you, not just what you expect. The unexpected can have a positive spin. And he acknowledges that he was narrow-minded and he became open to it.
It happens a lot. It happens a
But
lot.
you know, the hard part about casting is you go to the rest of that documentary and you see somebody basically say casting directors have no real. There's a conservative faction.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. It's an interesting position that we're in for sure.
Right.
Talking about the casting process a little bit more, because I know we have a lot of actors here. Were you involved in any of the casting process on the studio side?
Well, it's funny. Yes, primarily you're involved in the principal cast.
Right.
You have an opinion. You don't have
Mm-hmm.
you don't have green light ability. You don't have any kind of real power, but your opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But my opinion kind of started in the weirdest sort of way. Is I was a PA on Police Academy 2, going way back.
Uh-huh.
And the first director, who didn't stay on the show, was trying to decide who was going to be the female lead in that particular episode. And we brought actors that had a casting session and they taped everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up having drinks with the casting directors and the director
Mm-hmm.
afterwards, to celebrate the end of the day. And then,
Mm-hmm.
of course, the director right in the middle of that says, that one. And they ended up going with the one I liked, but it wasn't because of me. I was just confirming something that I'm sure that the director was fishing for, which was just kind of confirmation. But you know, you kind of, as a studio executive, spend a lot of time just. It's an interesting job being a studio executive, and I guess the best way I can put it. It may not sound right, but I used to say that when you take on a project that you love, you get it bought by the studio and you're not going to work on it. The first thing you need to do is write down the name of the actor that's wrong for the part and put it in an envelope, put it in your desk. And then when you wake up on the morning you're about to start shooting a movie, you open the envelope because there's a good chance that that person is now in your movie.
Wow. That is hilarious.
And the system kind of delivers it in the strangest way.
Yeah. That
So,
somehow you get convinced along the way that this is the way it should be.
Exactly, because you go mad, in little baby steps, because you're just trying to get it made and you're trying to figure out how to get it made, and you're hearing what they need, but we don't have this, but that, and you back your way into it without even noticing. Like,
without even
I don't know
knowing.
how that happened.
Yeah, I just said yes.
It's like it happened. I was there, so I take responsibility for being part of that process. But it's the studios don't want people to understand how little they actually know and what a facade they put on of showing that they know, so that they can.
I witnessed it. It's sort of like they know that they have to make a decision. They know they have to make an opinion. They know they have to challenge and push producers and writers, but not necessarily knowing in the right way. And it, and that shows itself sometimes.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's a really interesting thing, because I also would be somewhat sacrilegious, because I love writing and story and I have enormous respect for writers and what they do. But there's another studio part of me that will tell you that the success of any project its concept and casting is probably 75 to 80% of what makes something successful. If you get the casting right and you're in an area that people want to be in, they'll show up. Whether they stay long, that's the story.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree. Were there any sort of casting trends that you noticed that maybe you or other executives were really responsive to, or maybe not responsive to, whether it was an audition or maybe a list of actors? Like, was it generally sort of money driven? Were they more interested in aligning with the director? Was it a sort of, like you said, agenda that they were trying to fulfill? What were some trends that you had noticed with those decisions?
Well, the first thing is, how do I put this in a way that kind of makes sense? Because I have a tendency to go off on these tangents.
I love
And
it.
it all makes sense to me.
Yeah.
But
I can try to translate.
my daughter, when she was applying to college, basically through her peers and her group, kind of finally said to me one day, she said, you know, when people ask you what college you're applying to, they really just want to hear a name that they know and respect, and everything else is just white noise. So if you say I'm going to Pomona College because they have this great criminology program or whatever, I don't know, I'm going to Harvard. And they go, oh, you're going to Harvard.
Right.
And the studio system, especially as it relates to casting, but it really across the board, is a lot like that. Your job is easier when you go in and you say big name star.
Yeah.
Or big name comedian, or big name anymore, but
you do a little bit of work.
And I need you to actually get into the space, and I need you to appreciate what's here, and I've got to bring you up. And you got your boss's attention span for like this much. So you kind of instinctively are driven to this. If I just go in with a name, I'm better off, even if I don't totally see it. Right?
Right.
But those aren't the big issues. I mean, the few casting sessions that I was involved in, the decision-making process, I can think of two off the top of my head. One was Money Train, and trying to figure out who the female lead was. And curiously enough, the other one was a movie called The Next Karate Kid, which we were trying to figure out because the decision was to make the Karate Kid a woman. So we were trying to figure out who was going to be the next Karate Kid. So those were the moments where you end up in the basement of the Thalberg building, which is where the executive screening rooms are, and you're watching the taped auditions, and you're trying to make a decision. And we were watching tapes on Money Train with Jennifer Lopez and Cameron Diaz and Mira Sorvino, and there's a bunch of people that were up for it. And you're having this conversation: who's going to be the female lead, right? And you don't really feel like you control that space.
Yeah, you're right.
Right. You're just contributing to that space.
Right.
You're just giving your opinion in a way that makes sense to you.
Right.
But you're not in this dynamic. I'm going to make this happen.
Right.
And the same was true with the next Karate Kid. Hilary Swank ended up being the next Karate Kid, and in that one case, it kind of was pretty obvious that she would be that she was very talented. I was sitting in the screening room with Jerry Weintraub, who was the producer of that, and we're going to go talk to the head of the studio afterwards to talk about who should be it. But I think Jerry had already made up his mind.
Yeah.
That's where it was going. So it's like...
It's interesting because I see that happen a lot where a showrunner or a director seemingly makes up their mind, and then they'll sometimes they open it up to casting directors or the writer, and they'll say, what do you think? And then we'll say, you know, it's an interesting choice, but I think for kind of the tone that you're trying to create and whatever it is, that this person kind of falls more in line with that character. And they're like, okay. And we still end up going with the choice that they wanted.
Right.
But it sort of feels like, you know, we'll give you our opinion. Sometimes they do take it and change their mind. Very, very rarely, though.
Well, it's interesting because going back to Money Train, Joe Rubin was the director, and he pretty much wanted, I believe, if I remember this correctly, and again, I'm old, and I put an asterisk on everything I say. Put an asterisk on everything I say, and we'll be fine. I believe he wanted Mira Sorvino to play opposite Wesley Snipes and Woody Harrelson in this kind of love interest, and we ended up with Jennifer Lopez, and he was convinced away from that for a lot of reasons. One was a race issue.
Interesting. Wow. It just doesn't stop.
Right?
Yeah. I was kind of asking this earlier about how important is it to attach a name to a script when selling a script? Do you think it's like, if you're a writer trying to sell a script to a studio, is it more important to have a name attached, or is it more important to have a great script, specifically when you're talking about a studio?
Well, I don't know. I know what I think a great script is, but a great script is subject to interpretation.
Yeah.
Um, it's kind of hard for me to answer. Again, put the asterisk back, bring the asterisk back, because
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you that when I started teaching, which was only 10 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
which is a long time now, it was easier to teach. And I'll tell you why is because the business model hadn't changed in decades. Your theatrical basically supports your aftermarkets, whether it's VHS tapes that people are renting or DVDs or net stream.
Yeah.
You could see how people were making the financial part of the decision, which was always kind of complimented or insulted by the creative.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a clear pattern in terms of how decisions were made in features.
Mm-hmm.
With the rise of streaming and the decay of the theatrical market and
Mm-hmm.
the need for just tent-poling, the business model, the old business model has collapsed, in my opinion. And the new business model hasn't fully emerged because most of that stuff is secret. Netflix doesn't tell you what the real viewership is, who's tuned in, what the demographics are. They can't. They keep as much as they can to themselves. Primarily, as I'm looking at it, is because they can allows them to take more credit for what their successes are.
Sounds right.
So it's not you, the actor, or you, the director. It's us. We can target the right demographic with the right stuff. So don't try to come back for a lot more money.
Mm-hmm.
It's not you, it's us. And we're going to tell you when you fit. Kind of hard to clock. Do I need a good script? Do I need the right cat?
I know.
I need to know Netflix's, algorithm.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
But that aside, I believe maybe I'm naive in this. I believe a story well told, no matter what it is, has a value and can get made and can have success. And I think it was undeniable for what it needed to be, and it found a way. The problem happens is some stories may be really good, but the market, the audience for it is small. And if you make even if you make a great story for more money than the market will support, you will not have a financial success, and that will inhibit future projects, not just for you, but for a lot of people.
Right. That makes sense.
Which is not the same as television. Television, you could tell me more about, but it's a totally different model.
Totally different.
And, because we teach in the old model about budgeting, and no writer in television is really in the beginning worrying about the budget of the TV show. They're worried about the creative aspect of what is the show, what are the hubs, who's the star, what demographic is it going to appeal, and the network or whoever's making it basically we'll handle figuring out how much it's going to cost.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, do you want to go in having a project where an actor or an actress is attached that the studio, the financier is already in business with, is looking for something for that person? Absolutely, that's an advantage.
Yeah. I mean, that's been proven to be an advantage in the past, for sure.
You can't go wrong that way.
Yeah.
In terms of getting it made. But
what would you say is the biggest note that you tend to give actors, or actors, writers? What are the most common notes that you find yourself giving over the years?
There's just the most common note I give, and the biggest challenge I have as an educator and a producer. It kind of goes back to something that a director said when I was teaching at AFI, who was an alum and is a big supporter of the school. A really nice, great guy, Rick Rosenthal. And he was the first to expose me to this kind of expression. He calls it N.A.T.O, N-A.T.O. And it stands for, in his case, not attached to outcome. And he goes on to basically say that if you get into this creation business because you're looking to the outcome as important, the finished product, the success that comes with it, you will find that maybe in a great career, maybe 10% of your life is dealing with outcome. 90% of your experience is process. And if you love the process, then you will have a better time shifting through the craziness, because the process for all the changes in business models, the process isn't going to change. And the process is a rigorous process, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
And telling writers that you have to write multiple drafts and you have to take shots at multiple shows or web series, you have to get better at this muscle that you're trying to develop. And whatever your internal voice is and your vision is, that may be true and that may be spot on, but learning how to communicate it your way in an effective manner becomes the ultimate challenge. And people get frustrated with that really quick.
Yeah. Oh, I know. I know. That this is this applies to actors too, is not attached to an outcome, because it's just never going to work in your favor,
No, it's hard for everybody. I mean, people will admit right now, even the names that used to say, so and so, they'd make the phone book for, they won't make the phone book for anybody anymore.
Yeah. Right.
Right. Once upon a time, you go in and you say, oh, I got a low budget movie. It's like I got $5 million. Like now, which was low budget. Now it's like, you got $5 million?
I know.
Where'd you get $5 million?
I'll do it. Sign me
That
up.
doesn't exist. You're like, whoa, you're rich.
Yeah. Yeah. So talking a little bit about that process and how you were saying it can be a little bit grueling, especially for writers who are getting what advice do you have for writers going through that? Because I know I've have some writer friends and even actors who go through this experience. How do you not take it personally, or learn to turn that into something constructive?
That is another of the fundamental challenges of the process, and that's human nature.
Yeah.
But I have an idea, I express my idea, and if you say something that doesn't support that idea, you are attacking me.
100%. That goes a lot with actors and casting directors giving direction. It doesn't sit well because they think that it's a choice that we aren't accepting of, which the reality is, I love that choice, but I know what the producers are looking for. So let me help you,
But it's a human trait that there's no switch. You go, chink, I got that off. Some writers talk about they have to record the meeting, leave the meeting, give it a couple days, then re-listen to it from a space of not being in your face. And then they can start to hear the note behind the note. Right. And they can start to open up to, how am I going to make this better? But when you're in that first wave of, inevitably it feels like confrontation.
Yeah.
And I keep going back to my daughter conversations, and she's always the first to call me on it when she said something and I haven't heard it because I've taken it as some kind of attack on what I was trying to express. And she's saying, you're not hearing me. All right, let me breathe, count to 10, do some kind of trick because
right. That is, it's human nature. Exactly.
So you're going to hear a lot of bad notes.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole point, you're not in a really good creative relationship if you're not hearing bad notes, to me. Because if everybody were tasked with the same thing, that all your writing I have to think is great, or all my notes you have to think is great, nobody will say anything.
Absolutely.
Right? And it's easy to not say. The two things that are easy to not say anything, or to just be kind. Kindness is a kind of really bad thing.
Kind but not constructive.
Exactly. Because kindness passes the plate. It basically says, "Oh, what you did, that was so good. You're good." Privately, I don't know what I would do with it, but if I just say I liked it and they go on, whatever happens, I said it was good.
I know. Right. Now leave me alone. I said it was good. Now go away.
Now go away. So you're stuck in the choice. Do I say it's good, or do I don't say anything? Because if I actually start to say something, and then you get defensive, and then I get defensive back, and you go, well, that didn't help anybody.
Right. This is all, I think, great for writers and actors to hear. How often did you experience, when on the studio side, when you were giving notes, and maybe a writer or director or someone didn't agree, would the studio ever change their stance, or was it sort of like, you know, it's this way or the highway?
That is a great and a really important question, because as it kind of what I took away from the experience and to what I teach
Mm-hmm.
is the importance of going back to what you were concerned with, and continuing to speak on it the right way, respectfully and over time, is the best thing you can do on a project that you care about, right? Because a lot of notes, when you first hear them, are dismissed because they're not thinking about it, they didn't pay attention, they weren't in the right mindset, they hear it. And when you say a note and you get kind of a nothing or a, that's a stupid idea, which you can hear too, you basically, then you just sit back and you kind of go, okay, I'm just going to wait, and maybe you're right. But then if the movie comes out, the show comes out, and people start writing about this thing that you go, I told you. That's what you're thinking. You never actually say, I was right. Whereas people who really love the process realize that I'm going to say this note today, and then I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to say it again if I see it again in another configuration, another draft. Or we're going to shoot the scene tomorrow. I saw the rehearsal. I'm going to say it again. Or I'm going to look at the cut. And you keep looking for places to say, is this another chance to talk about it? Because maybe I said it wrong.
Right.
And maybe the director or whoever's in charge in that moment is open to seeing it now because they see it better.
Right. Now they can actually see it.
And then when you say it in that right moment, you get this shift, and it does actually change for the better. But most notes fall away pretty easily in the studios. You know, I can't tell you how studios are today. I had an adage that was always, don't do what I say, do what I want. I want it to be better, and I'm going to find a way to say it, and I may be wrong in how I'm saying it, right? But I want you to understand what I'm looking for, and if you bring it back to me your way, and it deals with it, I'm golden. But if you bring me back, which is the worst thing the power can give you, you bring me back what I told you to do, and all you do is proving that I'm wrong and I'm stupid. It doesn't really help either of us.
Right.
But some people are different, because some people like the idea. They feel that they are right, and they get it back, and then when it doesn't work, it's not my fault. The writer did it.
Right. Everyone just wants to blame each other, right?
And blame is a big thing here.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily have an issue with bad notes. Because the other thing I will use, because I spend a lot of time in development, and I'll tell you two things real quick, which is bad notes I use with students a lot, because if it forces them to become articulate what they're trying to do by my taking another position, then I've cracked it that way too.
Right.
Like, it forces you to defend yourself and express what's going on there. Go, aha! All right, let's go there. Now let's go down that street.
Right.
But the other thing, it goes back to this kind of pivotal moment in A Money Train. There was this scene that had been written that I thought didn't have an end. And it was a kind of early fight between Wesley Snipes' character and Woody Harrelson's character. And I was obsessed with trying to do something about it. And it became a couple days before we're going to shoot it. And we're shooting in New York at this point, and I'm in LA, obviously. And I tell the studio, my bosses, I want to take another shot at this. I'm going to go corner the director. We're going to shoot this thing soon. And I flew to New York to pay attention, because he's clearly busy doing the scene that he's shooting. And I'm told he will get to you as soon as he can, just hang out. And I had to go buy a winter coat because I was too stupid to have brought one. And I'm just kind of waiting. And I was by his chair. It was now 1 a.m. when he finally flops into his director's chair. And he looks up at the kind of broken thing. He says, all right, I know you're here for a reason, Kevin. Give it to me. So I make my big speech about what's wrong with the scene and how we might think about fixing it and da-da-da-da. And when I was done, he looked up and he kind of had this kind of world-weary expression. He said, Kevin, I had a vision for this picture once too. And
Wow.
and when you realize that kind of this process kind of breaks everybody down on some level,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
of course, by the way, the end of the story is they did the scene in rehearsal. They realized they didn't have a button and they improvised one. And
Mm. And then they realized in the moment. Right.
and I still kind of going, but if you'd actually put thought into it, maybe that improv would have been a little better, but
Yeah. It always comes out, right?
it comes out.
It comes out. Yeah.
So, again, you have to get used to hearing notes. You have to get used to hearing stupidity. You have to get used to knowing, this is a big thing for writers, knowing when you're actually making a connection with somebody in terms of the creative vision, because people will tell you what you want to hear if they want to be in business with you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Right.
I know you have a value.
Yeah. No, we're pausing again, but it'll come back.
Right. So it's like, if I know you have a value and I want you to be with me, I'm going to say all these kind of wonderful things. And then once you say yes, well, then you're going to find out who I really am.
Right. Right. It's this tough balance, right? Of trying to stay close to your intention with your story.
Well, even Spielberg tells a story. I saw it on tape. He'd recorded for AFI. And he tells the story about Close Encounters, Mountain, and understanding what's pulling him to this event. And he sent it out to his brain trust, which was some of the greatest minds of that period, whether it's Lucas and it's what is the John writer. Anyway, so he sends it out to his team, his group, his peers, and they're the best minds in the moment, right?
Yeah.
And they say, it's just too vague. There's no connection. There's no connection. You have to do something here to kind of, for us to understand what draws them. So Spielberg says he goes back and he does another draft and he sends it back and they say, too much. You're too on the nose.
Right.
And he closes and said, he finally just had to go to the set and just kind of do it instinctively. And sure enough, it worked.
It worked. Yeah.
But he kind of acknowledged you can't ever really fully expect salvation from anybody. The horror is your horror, and how you choose to navigate it is who you are.
Yeah. Yeah. Take it with a grain of salt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I wish there was a book that you could just consult.
I know.
And just go, oh, this is your problem. You right there. Just do
page 62. There it is. Yeah.
Done.
Yeah. It's not that simple. But I think that's the same goes for actors when we give them notes too. It's all about interpretation and making smart choices with the information you have. You want to see a release in this part, and so they go way too far with that because they're forgetting that, well, yes, they're emotional, but there's people around and they don't want to show it necessarily. So it's really about self intuition and like you were saying, taking each note with a grain of salt a little bit.
Right. Well, see, here somebody's mentioned Robert McKee, who's one of the storyteller gurus who I've read his book and I can't disagree with everything he says.
Disagree? Is that what you said?
I can't disagree. He contains wisdom, as does Save the Cat. There's wisdom in almost every storytelling, screenwriting book I've ever read. Application of that wisdom is the conversation.
Yeah.
How do you apply this in a way that it makes it yours and doesn't feel like you're doing it artificially because of somebody's instruction?
Yes, 100%, which definitely goes for actors as well with all of the amazing acting books out there, is how do you make it authentic to yourself?
Well, full transparency, one of the regrets I have about my college experience is I ended up becoming a drama major. But I have a huge stage fright. I'm scared of being in large groups of people.
Same.
So I managed to cobble together a drama degree that required no acting. And that remains a huge regret as I've gotten older and experienced and realized that not having that point of view of the process is probably I consider my biggest limitation.
Interesting. Yeah. it's valuable, you know, for sure to be able to have that point of view. I was actually a theater major myself before I switched to film, but did not go through it for similar reasons. I don't like the stage. I also didn't necessarily want to make it a career, but it is extremely insightful. You know, because at the end of the day, we're all people, and we're all humans, and we all have different experiences, and to be able to understand that is important, you know. On that note, I just got our 2-minute countdown, which is insane.
Wow.
It goes so quickly. These go so quickly, and they kick you off after an hour. So I don't want them to. And every time they put the 2 minutes up there, it always, for some reason, cuts me off under 2 minutes.
Yep.
So to try and not have you cut off, I just want to thank you so much for doing this. I know are you still working right now?
We're planning the fall right this
Okay.
second. So
Okay.
yeah, we shouldn't be working, but the extraordinary circumstances, we are working.
Yeah. Well, please stay safe, stay well. Thank you so much. I think this was just a mind-blowing wealth of information, and I can't thank you enough for doing this. I mean, it was so fun to finally be able to sit and chat with you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the time.
Good.
Really appreciate my time with
you.
you.
I'm glad. Thank you.
Okay.
And hey, $230 for Equal Justice Initiative. So
awesome.
Thank you so much to everyone who donated.
Yes. Thank you.
Goes right to that amazing cause.